Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager, and I'll be your host today. This episode is sponsored by the Toledo Area Weavers Guild. We thank the Guild so much for sponsoring us today. That's so nice of them to do that. It's great to have the regional and local guilds involved in Textiles and Tea. We love it. Today, as always, we'll take questions. The last 15 minutes, we'll take the questions that you put in the Q&A box. If you put them in chat, I have a hard time seeing them. We love your comments. Keep those coming, but questions should be in the Q&A. Today, we have David van Buskirk. David has been told that he has a gift for weaving, and you will see that today when you see his work. It's amazing. He has never lost his fascination for taking hundreds of separate threads and weaving them into an organic creation. He is drawn to the act of making with his hands. The sensory experience of touching and manipulating yarns or fibers, and provides him with a serene place to live and thrive. As a weaver, he's always in collaboration with the loom. I love that saying. That's so unique. We'll have to talk more about that. It's as important to him as the materials his hands work with. Whether it's complex or simple looms, weaving requires mechanism to create warp and weft, the structure in which his art is made. Hi, welcome to Textiles and Tea, David.
Hi.
We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We love being in your studio space. It's wonderful.
Okay.
Well, let's get started with the important question. What is your favorite tea?
My favorite tea is actually probably Earl Grey with cornflowers, although I'm cheating. I'm actually drinking water because an hour ago I had a double espresso, and if I drank an Earl Grey right now, I'd be blathering.
I like the mug has the tea string on it.
I usually in the evening I drink like an herbal sort of a chamomile tea, but yeah, I just had during the day I'm kind of a coffee drinker, so but I also every so often I do love I love Earl Grey.
Well, that's cool. And we don't want a blathering, David, so that's all right. We understand that. Could you share with us how you got started in fibers?
Yeah, when I was in college, I was studying art and I went to the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, and was going to be an art teacher. And I was at that time really more interested in ceramics. That's where I spent most of my time. But I had to take a class called Craft Introduction to Craft on Fabric. And one little project in that was to do a weaving on a found object. And I did my first weaving, and after that, I just wanted to weave. And that coincided with an exhibition in Denver on fiber arts, and that would have been 1973 maybe, and it had people like Abacanovich and all of those greats of that mid 20th century fiber arts, Sheila Hicks, and I couldn't believe what I saw, and I loved it. So I just kept going.
Well, good for us. That's wonderful. That'll say a little more about some of the work we're going to look at later, the whole weaving on found objects. That's good to know. Well, the first work we're going to look at is called Touched by Love. It's amazing. This is a beautiful work with a beautiful story behind it. Would you share with us the story of this piece?
Oh, sure, I'd love to. Thank you for asking. This is an image of my mother's hand. It's actually from her last day of living. And she was an amazingly creative, artistic person. I'm sure, I got my artistic gifts from both her and my dad. But I moved, she died at 98, and at 96, I moved back to Denver from New York City, where I had my career, to take care of her. And so I was just fascinated, her hands, which had been so creative in terms of cooking, and she did all these embroideries. And by the end of her life, her hands were riddled with arthritis. Her thumb bent out at a right angle. It was so I was just fascinated by, and, kind of horrified and touched and moved by her hands. And so I kept taking pictures during those 2 years I was living with her and taking care of her. I took various pictures of her hands, and on her last day, I took several pictures, and then I got kind of creeped out that I was doing this on her deathbed, and I got rid of all of them but this one. And when I went back months later to start this tapestry, I just kept coming back to this hand. So clearly something kept me from taking it. She, it just, to me, she was ready to go. A few days before, we put her into hospice, and her minister came by and asked how she felt knowing that she was in hospice. And she just looked at him and thought for a moment and said, "I'm optimistic." And I just think that's the pose of her hand. So what I did is I integrated several of her embroideries with this image of her hand, and kind of worked out a structure to so I could insert the tapestries, as you can see, sort of at the bottom and at the top. I had a secondary warp that I would raise intermittently so I could insert the tapestries. I cut them into strips, but then I could insert them into the body of the tapestry. And for the background, I took some of the images and did kind of a very rough kind of sumac effect for the background flowers taken from the other ones. So it's kind of like she and I collaborating together, on this piece. And it's right now, it's hanging at the Art Students League in Denver for a show on memory and nostalgia, which I think was totally appropriate.
Yeah. I like her. I wish I'd met her. She sounds amazing.
She was a good lady, wonderful lady.
Well, this next image that I saw, which was Augie's workroom or studio, Augie's studio, right?
Correct.
And I can't even pronounce what the little word is, but I thought of Andrew Wyeth, because sorry, my dog's in on this conversation too, because his portrayal of light, this reminds me of how he does that. And I remember just looking at it going, oh, that looks like Andrew Wyeth. And then I got closer and saw that it was a tapestry. I was amazed. It was weaving. So it's just amazing how you've done this light, dark. Can you talk some about this?
Sure. And yet again, another important woman in my life, Augie, the namesake of this, was my mentor. She was a very famous Swedish textile designer who was from the 1920s to 1987. She was famous in Sweden and had she was one of that group, many people who created Swedish modern. And I went to study with her as an apprentice back in 1977. I left Denver to go study with her, and she opened this whole world for me. But this was, I took this from a photograph it's hard to see, but once you see, I'm sure you'll not be able to get it out of your sight. That's actually the shadow of two clothespins that were hanging behind a piece of cheap newsprint that was hanging on a window. So you do see the light from the window coming in, hitting the newsprint, and the shadow of these two clothespins. And she used to have the clothespins there because she would, as she was designing, she did a lot of fabrics for the window. And so she did a lot of commercial fabrics, what we would call contract fabrics now, but she did a lot of window fabrics. And so she'd weave a sample. When she'd weave a sample, she'd cut it off the loom and hang it in the window to see how the light passed through. Because in Sweden, it's so dark that having light come through windows was really important. So that's, so it kind of brings in those things. And then the modeled effect of the newsprint, I had at that point seen several examples of Helena Hellmark's tapestries and her use of rose path to create various effects. So I stole that idea from her and used that to get the modeled speckled effect of the newsprint. I think you're muted.
Sorry, I take care of the dog. Every time I look at that, I see more because you kept talking about the clothespins, and I just saw the clothespins finally. That's one of those pieces I wish I could see it. You know, when it's on display sometime, let us know.
I'm so touched that you saw that you responded to the light, because it's a wind, it shadows from a window, and that no one's ever noticed that before. You're the first one who really spoke about that. So
oh goody, oh good. I feel so
hooray.
important. Well, you definitely think outside the box when it comes to the materials that you use. And I love this next part. These are images of hand-woven glass with a wire weft. So the warp is glass and the weft is wire.
Actually, it's the opposite.
I'm sorry.
Actually, it's the opposite. It's a wire warp. So it's
horizontal.
Yes.
Got
yes.
it. Would you talk more about this? How'd you come up with this? This is great.
Well, this was during my period in New York as a textile designer, and I had been to Neocon, which is a big contract show in Chicago, lots of textiles and office furniture, and I had gone to a display there on decorative laminates. There was a group of people who specialized in decorative laminates, Wilsonard and Formica, that whole type of material. And they had a sample there of a like a Formica, a laminate, a decorative laminate that had a image of a woven impressed on it. And it was just kind of an average woven. And I just thought, oh, I could do so much more interesting stuff. So I started doing things, and I was mentioning it to one of the design directors at, I think it was Formica. And she said, doing soft textiles on a hard surface is kind of weird. I don't know whether it really works. And I thought what she said made sense. So I thought, well, what would it be like if I wove with hard materials? So I decided to just get some galvanized steel wire at the hardware store and make a warp. And I wove a variety of things, but my favorite one was this. glass tiles. I got these at a tile, a tile shop. But I just thought when you see how the sun kind of filters through, and it's just so beautiful. I've yet to do anything more with it, but at some point, I would love to try and figure out how to do, I don't know, architectural pieces, 5 feet wide, 8-foot panels or something. I think they'd look beautiful at the entrance to a restaurant. Again, I don't know how I would weave something that big and heavy, but well, more to be revealed about that. But it was kind of that was, I think, the most successful thing out of it, and I hope to figure out do more with it at some point.
And did you do it on a loom?
Yes, I did it on my AVL right here.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
That AVL has seen such crazy stuff on it. It could tell a lot of stories.
Like if it could talk. Well, your use of 3D weaving in this next piece called Mountain Caprice is another example of kind of a unique approach to a flat surface, and you make it very 3D. So could you talk some more about this one?
Yeah, well, this piece this was one of the things I did when I came to Denver. As I said, I spent my career from 1981 until 2015 in New York City, and as a textile designer. And so I'm a weaver. I was born a weaver. I guess the weaving god picked me. So I'd always done, very technical things. And when I moved to New York, my career as a designer had kind of played itself out. I still had a couple of customers, and they were in North Carolina and in India. And as I was concerned about my mother and her difficulty when she was, by the time she was 96, it was getting hard for her to live alone. So I realized I could work as easily out of a studio in Denver as out of a studio in Manhattan. So I moved to Denver, and I did continue working, but I also had started really wanting to do more art, fiber art and art again. So I decided to just go back to weaving on a found object, which is the very first weaving I ever did. So I just got a branch, a really simple branch from a city park here in Denver, and broke it in half, and did and decided to just, as an antidote to all the technical weaving on 16 and 20 harnesses and the jacquard weaving, to just limit myself to plain weave and basket weave, and just to work with a weighted warp in a very primitive structure. But the branch kind of, I kept thinking especially with the way at the bottom, the branch comes out, that little branch comes out. I thought, oh, that would make a really nice way of, maybe I have pieces coming out of it. So it kind of evolved organically. I had a abstract sketch and intention to weave the 3 bottom flaps, but the very top one that hangs over the top, I actually was planning to have it. I actually initially tied it to that last little twig on the far left, and it just looked ugly. I don't know, it just didn't work well. So I cut it, I removed it, and just started playing with it, and it just looked really beautiful the way it kind of hangs and drapes like you see in the detail of it. But it was really just kind of to break with all of that technical weaving that I did, and also use up all of these beautiful samples of yarns that I'd picked up over the years, all these crazy texture. I love textural materials. So just working with a bunch of things that I had, little spools of this and that.
I love all that texture too. I'm glad we had the close up. You can really see more of the along the edge, especially with the texture. Well, you were talking about earlier designing contract fabric, and you designed that, like you said, 35 years. And these are examples of your samples of the work you did. So, and I remember when I was working on a question about this, there were like 30 questions I wanted to ask, because about how it's done and, you know, how you came up with it and working with them. But I guess I kind of settled down on the question of what is the best and the worst parts of designing a commercial product?
I think the best part is I love sort of the cleanliness of a lot of contract design people and you know, the sophistication of the market. There's you know, there's a lot of very sophisticated clients that you're working with. There's a Knoll, the Steelcase, Herman Miller. You know, they're demanding and they're fun to work with. And I also, that aesthetic, that very modernist aesthetic appeals to me. I think from my time, you know, I learned textile design at the foot of a master of Swedish modernism and in Augie. And so I've always gravitated to that kind of clean modernist line. The challenge, the hard part about it is that you cannot have long floats. A lot of times, if I had a float that was 1/8 of an inch long, it was too much.
Wow.
So it's hard to do things that are interesting and have some kind of texture, especially when you're, for me, I was working with a division of Burlington, and they did 100% synthetic filament polyester yarn. So you're working with flat textured yarns. And as you saw in the image that was there, most of the yarn that they sent me was white, but after it was dyed, some of the yarn would dye different colors, different tonalities. That's using like a dispersed polyester yarn and a cationic polyester. The dispersed and cationic absorb different yarn, dye stuffs, dye chemicals. So when you put the two yarns together in a fabric and put the two dye stuffs in the dye bath, the colors separate into these sections, but you're designing it with white on white, and you're just sort of going, I think this is going to look good, but you never really know until you get the finished piece. So, and that is also, I think, you know, that whole collaborative effort, you know, I only looked as good as the people at the mill, you know, and I always think that one of the things I was really happy about with, sometimes on the bad side, you know, I'm creating a lot of polyester fabric that at some point is going to go into landfill. And I've never been able to reconcile myself with that. I mean, I've made a lot of landfill in my life. And I think as designers, we have to be aware of that. You know, that's just, but at the same time, I kept a lot of people working, and I kept a lot of families in braces and, you know, and food and clothes. And at the mill, you know, my fabrics kept looms running and dye houses running. And that, to me, that's an honorable work.
I like that. I never thought about that, but you're right. There's both sides of that coin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've also taught at the Fashion Institute of Technology, FIT, and then you taught at the Student Art League in Denver. How does teaching students compare to, you know, making these amazing commercial products?
Well, you know, when I first started weaving, I remember and at FIT, it was much more technical. We designed, you know, I was teaching students, I was preparing students to be designers in the industry. So it was much more technical. And I thought, oh, this is a breeze. I'm an expert weaver. it's really different when you're trying to tell somebody who doesn't know about any of this. How do you communicate this? That was a real challenge for me. Also trying to reach some, 18-year-olds who really find, the difference between air textured polyester and false twist textured polyester really boring. And they're not wrong, because it really is boring, except to nerds like maybe you and I, me for sure. But I found it really tested me that I had to how do I tell them how to do that? The pieces that you're seeing here, the one on the left, which is again 3 branches, that's kind of a new direction that I'm going in, which is again working with more branches, but I want to introduce extra branches like you see in the middle. And this came from a riverboat trip. Those pieces of wood I stole from the Grand Canyon out of a campsite down on the Colorado River. But I was really struck by the way the Zoroastro granite would kind of create these tendrils and veins of pink on this black, dark Vishnu schist. The other piece I did in preparation for, that was actually a tapestry postcard for the American Tapestry Association. You would sign, I signed up to do a postcard, both I and another person who they assigned to each, they signed us together. We each wove a postcard size tapestry, attached it to a postcard and mailed it. And so
Mailed it?
Yes.
Oh.
I'm going to run and show you.
Do you think he'll come back?
Here we go. This was my partner's. She lives in Washington State, so this was of Mount Rainier, which she saw from her studio window. So, but that was preparing me for working on, actually the one on the right was preparing me to work on this piece here, which you can kind of see, which is my largest found wood piece. And that is, there's a sketch of this, which really came from, my inspiration really was the rocks and the canyons in Grand Canyon. And I'm slowly starting to weave it, but I really haven't put a lot of effort into it yet. But and it's got a couple of sticks, pieces of branches sticking out. So I'm hoping there's going to be kind of wings coming out from one fabric and splitting into a triple fabric. And I'm more to be revealed. I have no idea how that's going to look, but
Ooh, I can't wait to see it. Well, speaking of this piece, our next image is of drawings that you've done for future tapestries. So talk, if you would, share with us a little bit your design process.
It's very, it's kind of irrational. And it's funny because I think as a weaver, one is very rational. I'm a very rational, you have to be rational to weave, but I'm also very instinctual and kind of gut level thinker, very irrational. So I don't know how I became a weaver. It's weird. But so I think with this, I did lots and lots of sketches. I did. So I did a lot of, so I was working on the idea for this stick and working with branches and just various ideas. So, and this is kind of where that little postcard tapestry came from, working as I started getting towards more stone effects. And again, going back and forth to doing like branches. but then I kind of, if we go back to that, well, you can see there that image. I really was, as I was working on this, I just come back from this trip down the rafting down the Grand Canyon, and the rock formations, the strata of the canyon was really speaking to me. So I ended up kind of going in this direction. You can see a little sketch of what the branch would look like. And then I had a piece, since there's two branches that stick out, my idea was to have the branch that sticks out in front would have a different kind of a pattern, like it's got the oranges and reds, and then behind it on the full length of the branch is going to be greens, and the greens will come out behind. I wanted the two layers to kind of meld so that they that from whatever way you look at it, the background and the back piece and the front piece meld together on the right side. So it was just kind of I did a lot of sketching, and I just, I must have done 4 different sketches of this before I hit up on one that I thought was acceptable. So, and then the other piece, I've just in the last few years, my connection with the Art Students League came from starting to take a pastel drawing class with a professor, an instructor named Doug Dawson, who's a brilliant landscape and portraitist. And he teaches both pastel and oil. And I decided to do the pastel because I like drawing more than painting. So pastel pastel is kind of painting, drawing combined. So this came actually from a photograph of a little creek. I shot this from above. It was about 10 feet on a bridge, 10 feet above this little creek in the mountains just west of Denver. And yeah, it was just a really pretty pattern. I'm realizing it could be a really beautiful tapestry at some point. Though how to get all that detail, I don't know it.
I love that drawing. I love that pastel. That's beautiful. And I love it that it's behind you. We saw the drawing and then it's right there behind you and you're working on it.
Yeah. And there's kind of 2 different things kind of going on in my art. So I've got this very organic kind of tendency, very natural, gestural. And then this is a piece I'm working on for it's called The Face of Fiber here in the Rockies. And I wanted to do something that was kind of inspired. Well, I saw this, this was a Swedish crystal vase, and I just love the pattern work on that. And so I just kept kind of toying with the idea of turning that into a tapestry. So that's mine is much more louder in color and a little more cacophonous than the elegant Swedish crystal, but I'm working on it. And actually, as I just told you before we started, I've been working on a sample to kind of work on the technique. So again, I didn't really have a clear idea of what kind of technique I wanted. So I needed to weave a sample to try various constructions. I think I approach my design work the same way, or my tapestry artwork, the same way I approached my designs. It's the structure, trying to find a structure that says whatever it is I'm trying to convey. So I worked out I tried different techniques, and it's going to have several different techniques weaving simultaneously. So, and that'll go on the Dobby loom. So I had to figure out how to sort of sequence the weave structure so I could weave each section as it came up. So, and this is actually more, I suppose the structure here is more informed by like a jacquard weaving. Because, with jacquards, you're constantly, you're burying picks and you're weaving certain sections with certain structures at the simultaneously as you're going across the width of the fabric. So, so anyway, I think I finally nailed the construction, and now all I have to do is make a warp and thread it and get started on this tapestry. But I think it's capturing. So I work again very sort of organically and sort of haphazardly, and
so it sounds like you make some changes as you're weaving, right?
Oh yeah, and to do this, I was trying to put different, like you can see, there's different colors in there and then overlays, and I just hated what I was doing here. I thought it just didn't look good, and then accidentally I did this one little piece right across here, and I was about ready to give up. And when I saw that, I went, "That's it. That's the solution." So I went on and kind of explored it in greater detail here, and it's actually, the structure it's on 8 harness. It's an 8 pick weave, and it's really very easy, which I was making it very complicated, and it turned out to be actually, once I simplified things, it started working.
So the drawing over your right shoulder is what you're referring back to when you were weaving this?
Yes.
Okay.
So those structures, like you can see the vertical lines in the turquoise, there's those vertical turquoise, orange and green, horizontal and verticals. That's going to be this. And then this structure would be the star shapes. And then the center, I'll be playing with a slightly different version. You can see there's sort of different textures. So that's going to be the inside of those different squares that you see, like right there. So, but yeah, I've got to, I had to put the sample on first because I really don't know what I'm doing.
Say that like it's a bad thing.
I try, it's important to not know what you're doing. I think, it's sort of like in the Buddhism, they talk about not knowing, and that used to stress me out. I go to see, I'd be once going to a mill in Brazil, and they want, I'm there to solve problems. I didn't know what I was doing. And now I've learned, I just don't know. And I've just got to not know until, or I always tell this to my students, but it's really hard to tell it to myself. I'm really good at telling it to others, but living it myself. But just help me to get it wrong until I get it right. Or getting it wrong is the way to getting it right.
Well, I think that sample is such a great juxtaposition of, which I am terrible at. I don't sample well. I just kind of go. But I loved how and I can see that from the 35 years that you did what you did, is that you have everything labeled and you're very clear what you're doing and your changes. You juxtaposition that with the kind of go with the flow and see where it goes. That's a great combination in that one sample. I love that.
Thank you.
Now you have traveled, like you just said, you went to Brazil. You've traveled, it sounds like a great deal. And I always love to know how traveling impacts on artists. So how do you think it impacted on you?
Well, I think that certainly, my trip, my journey to Sweden, which was a 3.5-year journey. I went to Sweden to stay for 6 months, and 3.5 years later I came back. But that was just a profound sea change. I really didn't know what I was. I was always grateful to my mentor. She was very difficult. She was a hard woman. But to be a woman in design, in industry, in the 50s and 60s, yeah. She had a lot. She was hard as nails. And at the same time, incredibly sensitive. I think sort of like a Coco Chanel, hard-nosed businesswoman and passionate and temperamental, artistic at the same time. So, that just, I've just that just so radically changed my life. I don't think I would have, and it allowed me to move to New York and to pursue a career in a city. I love New York. I loved being a New Yorker, and I'm good with moving to Denver. And I have now a really beautiful setup here, and with gorgeous sunlight, as you can tell from in my studio, and a lovely live work situation. But I think that living like in Sweden, it just helped me to see that people think differently and they live differently. Just the fact that in a different language, people, I'd been terrible with languages and was your typical ignorant, sort of uncaring American, baby boomer. And it wasn't until I went to Sweden, I went, oh, people think, their whole thought process is organized differently around this language. And that was a fascinating thing. And, I do love seeing the art of different cultures. And I haven't traveled internationally in a good 20 years, but I'm looking forward to getting back to that now that I'm no longer trying to pay a New York City mortgage and maintenance.
Yeah, I think of that Denver area and New York. They're both 10s on a scale of 1 to 10, but on a different continuum, right?
Right, yeah.
Because I've been to both, and I agree. But what a culture shock to go from one to the other.
Yeah. Well, it was a bigger shock when I remember when I moved from Sweden to New York. I was living in these little tiny towns in the middle of the country, and then suddenly having to take the one train every day down to a hand weaving studio.
Now, you said you were in Sweden 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
What was your internship, a year?
Well, it was going to be originally a 6-month, 3-month to 6-month stay. My teacher, my mentor, who I went to study with, Augie, when I got there, she said, she was really tough. She said, you don't know very much, you don't know. And, she spoke her mind. She could be, as I said, she was hard. She was very hard-nosed. And she goes, you don't know wheat, S-K-I-T, and it means exactly what you think it means. And in Swedish.
Sign that says that.
But she believed in me. And so because of her, she said, you don't know, you don't have a fundamental knowledge of weaving. But you've got a great color sense and this, and I think you could be a textile designer. And, why do you want to be, you don't want to be a fiber artist. You're going to starve, be a textile designer. And so because she had faith in me, and because of her reputation, she literally just made a few phone calls and doors opened for me.
Wow.
I went, so instead of staying for 6 months, I applied and was accepted into, it's called HOV. We were mentioning Handweavers, the Friends of Handiwork, Handarbetets Väners Vävskola in Stockholm, which was this very creative place, but it taught the basics of Swedish hand weaving, very old-fashioned, very craft-oriented. But if you wanted to do something crazy with it, they were like, yeah, let's figure this out. So it was very creative, and they're still there, and they do much more creative work. I think the way the whole textile education has expanded, become much more sophisticated, they have too. I've seen brilliant work coming out of them. But that gave me a foundation. And then Augie also called, she said, you need to learn the basics of hand weaving, then you need to learn how to work in the industry. So you should go to, it's called the Textile Institute, which was in a little podunk town in the middle of Sweden. I mean, I told people friends in Stockholm that I was moving to Borås, and they say, that's known as the most boring town in Sweden. And the most boring town in Sweden is boring. That's a low bar. But, you know, I would, again, because of her reputation, people, the school just said, yeah, let him, yeah, he can come. So, so I went there for 2 years. It wasn't a sophisticated school. They've grown immensely. I've seen their current work, and they're doing a lot of work with experimental fibers and recycled materials and high-tech things. They've turned into a much more, it was a very sleepy little, like a vocational college when I went there.
Well, let me ask you something. I hate to interrupt you, but we've got a lot of people asking this. Now, your mentor, is her last name Oosterberg?
No, it's Feitel, F-A, I'll spell it. It's
Okay.
Augie, A-G-E, that's her first name.
Okay.
Her last name is Feitel or Faith L. So it's F-A-I-T-H dash E-L-L, Faith dash L.
Oh, okay.
And you can, recently, last year, a woman actually did a whole, she was studying Swedish rug design and did a whole thing on her stuff. So if you Google Augie Feitel, you'll see her, and a few pictures that I took of her in her beautiful, she lived in her parental home, which was considered, it was one of the finest, it was one of the two finest examples of Jugend art, arts and crafts homes in Sweden. The other being Carl Larsson's house, which is a very famous house. But it was kind of, again, I was so lucky. I just, you know, this kid from Denver, Colorado, and I just fall into these, you know, this historical home with, you know, hand painted walls and, you know, just this incredibly demanding estate.
Well, we are going to jump over to questions, if that's okay.
Right. Perfect.
A lot of people are asking some questions here. So Joan Wells wants to know, are you related to David and Elizabeth van Buskirk, who are founders of the Andean Textile Art Center?
No, but that's an interesting, I have no idea. I don't think I'm related at all, but it's.
But we're going to have to
someone.
introduce you to.
Yeah.
Well, this is a good question. Nan Hallberg wants to know, the piece Touched by Love, is the warp horizontal as we looked at it?
No, yes, the warp is horizontal. The weft was vertical as you were looking at it. So yeah,
good
it was
eye,
turned,
Nan.
yeah.
Good eye. Oh, how big were the glass and the wire pieces?
They were very small. They were only 6 inches, 7 inches wide.
Thanks, Brenda. That was a good question. Oh yeah, this is Susan wants to know, did you have to have a special reed to beat that wire glass piece?
No, I just used my, I don't even remember how many ends per inch it was. I had a pretty solid, probably 8 or 10 dent reed that I used. You didn't have to beat it that hard.
It was more like placing it, right?
Yeah.
Well, Karen LeBlanc wants to know, can you talk about any large installations that you've done or any that you would like to do at some point, and what would the location be?
I would love to. I've not done any large installations. And I would love to. I think, like a lot of maybe fiber artists, I think that the corporate structure, corporate offices lend themselves to the textiles enhance so much that kind of hard steel, glass, stone environment. And so I would love to, that's kind of one of my visions, is to find commissions to create large pieces for such an environment.
We look forward to seeing them.
Thank you.
No pressure, but we look forward to seeing you. Eileen Van Bronkhorst, Eileen, she said that she really likes your work and that she was the one that you exchanged the postcards with, right?
Yes, that's
She said, so cool. But she also has a question. She wants to know, I'm assuming it's the piece right behind you. Are you going to weave that from the top down?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's much harder that way because the yarn, the filling doesn't stay in place. It wants to pull down. So I'm constantly having to rebeat it back up.
Oh, okay.
But it's the only way I wanted, as the sketch was showing the flow of that piece there, I want it to grow organically with the wood. So I've got to work. I felt like that's the only way I could do it, but it's much harder that way.
Oh, so we've answered that one. Oh, Kay Crippen wants to know, are you still teaching some? Is your studio in Denver? She has a bunch of questions. And she said, I used to know you when I sold you polyester fiber. I loved your mother's hands tapestry. You know, Kay.
Yes, Kay.
It's old home week, yay.
Yes, I can still remember you trying to get out of a cab in a sari in the wind in Chicago, picking up your sari and almost blowing it off you. So Kay, it's so nice to I'm sorry, what were the questions? Kay, thank you. Kay was a wonderful support for me when I was working at Burlington, and we were consuming a lot of her polyester. So that was, but we did some really wonderful things together. And I remember she hosted me at a hotel in Laguna Beach after a West Week in California. So,
well, she wants to know, are you still teaching?
I've just started teaching again at the Art Students League. I taught a tapestry workshop, and I've just ordered from Shock Spindle and Diecraft, the Shock Spindle, some cricket looms that I'm going to be doing I'm going to be teaching rigid heddle looms at the Art Students League.
Ann Wolper wants to know, was the technique for the twig piece done like a backstrap weaving?
No, it was done as a weighted warp, so that I tied on the there's a top stick and a bottom stick, and then I actually had a string and a heavy book tensioning the warp between the two sticks.
Okay. Yeah, somebody else is asking, what are the challenges working with sticks? I think that would be very challenging, working with sticks.
Well, as you can see, this stick, you can't really see, but I've got little thumbtacks stuck into the stick, because where it's moving at those angles, the warp doesn't stay put.
Oh, I bet not.
And I learned that from the earlier piece that you showed that we call the Zoroaster granite. That piece, the warp kept slipping and sliding all over the place. It was just driving me crazy. So,
was it heavy?
No, it's very small. It's only about.
No, the one behind you.
Oh, yeah, that one's pretty heavy.
It looks like.
Because it's about 6 feet by. It's about 6 feet long.
Susan Caton wants to know, did you learn on a warp weighted loom in Sweden? What did you weave on in Sweden?
I wove on mostly jack looms and glimokras or countermarche.
Okay.
My mentor in Sweden had 2 countermarche looms and then I don't even know the name of it. Where you've got the pieces hanging counterweight. Is it a counterbalance? I think it's a counterbalance looms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gail Glick wants to know, do you spin your own yarn? And do you prepare your own warp and weft material?
No, I'm too lazy. I've never had the patience for spinning. I've never tried it, or what little I've done. I've spun paper.
Really?
Yeah.
That's not being lazy.
Yeah. Well,
I keep losing him. He keeps running away.
I was again doing experiments for wall covering, and so I took like art paper,
Ah,
Japanese rice paper and tile. And there was an art store in called Central Art Supply in New York City. It's now gone, like everything else, but they would sell these hundreds of handmade papers. So I'd buy some, I cut them into strips and twist them, and then make like prototype. These were sort of prototypes for wall coverings. Again, you wouldn't make a wall covering out of this; it'd take too long.
oh,
But to like, again, I had no problem thinking industrially. So the idea of this would be make a mold of this and then do vinyl wall coverings, which I think would be gorgeous.
like I said, you always think outside the box.
So that's the only spinning that I've done, which of course is crazy. And I don't know, but I'm always impressed by the, in the Egyptian galleries at the Metropolitan, you would see those linens that they would use to wrap mummies, and they'd have these rolls of linen. It's just like in 1500 BC, they were spinning this incredibly fine, smooth linen. It's just like, how do they do it? It's just astonishing.
But here's a good question for you. How would you recommend someone get into textile design as a beginner?
Textile design, I would, again, the center for that is New York City. But I would look at, if you would look at various like home furnishings magazines, and the kind of look at the kind of companies that they advertise, Schumacher, Kravet, or look at the kind of fabrics that they use in the credits. They'll credit, Kravet Fabrics or Clarence House. I would just sort of start researching and seeing what they do. Women's wear, I don't have a lot of experience with. I did, I think the challenge as a weaver, for me, the last 10 years of my career were really a struggle, because I'm a weaver, I'm a maker, and I needed to work with the textile mills, the jobber, the people that, a lot of the people who are like a Knoll Fabrics or Schumacher, they don't make any fabric. They contract with other makers to create their lines, and they're more like editors building a collection. And sometimes they commission, they can be very creative. They commission things. They have designers and architects create things, but it's a lot harder now because there's not that much, 3/4 of the companies I used to work for don't exist.
Oh.
The last mill I worked for was a company called Forsman, and they did beautiful wool fabrics, and they had 4 mills in Georgia, and none of those mills exist anymore. All those jobs, all gone. So that's a part of the challenge. But I would just research and then, go to New York and try and bring in work and see what people say.
Well, somebody from FIT is doing a plug. They're like, apply to the Fashion Institute of Technology.
Yeah. I just saw a little note there in chat that Patrice George, I think, is watching this, and she gave me my first job in New York City.
Really? This is Old Home Week for you. You got your whole posse out there.
And really that's what allowed me to stay, because I moved to New York in the middle of in the Reagan recession in 1981, and there were
Ouch.
no jobs.
Oh, yeah.
And she offered me a job in her studio, and that was that little toehold, and slowly but surely
Well, Patricia, we all thank you. And I can't believe it, but we have to stop for the day. David, this has been so much fun. I'm sure everybody agrees with me. We will all come over to your house and just kind of hang out, right?
Oh, you're welcome to. And in the summertime, there's a
see
huge
more
balcony.
things, show us more stuff. But I do want to thank you. And if y'all please go to David's website and you can see more of his work at dvbart-design.com. And you can see more about him. You can contact him. We didn't get to all the questions, of course, but I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer your questions if you contact him through there. Also, I want to thank our sponsor for today, which is the Toledo Area Weavers Guild. Again, thank you for supporting Textiles and Tea. That's very generous of a guild to do that, and we do appreciate you doing that. Thank you, Toledo. We will also want to inform you that money also comes from donations to the Fiber Trust. If you would like to see more programming like this, and some of the programming we've had lately has just been so much fun with Spinning and Weaving Week and the Guild Retreat. That was wonderful. All of that comes from donations to the Fiber Trust and your membership. So if you would like to donate or join, please go to weavespindye.org. You can watch Facebook. You can watch all of these episodes on Facebook. And if you want to go back and see David's again today, you can. You don't have to have an account to do that. You can go in and watch them. And we're also putting them up on YouTube. And also, if you haven't signed up, please sign up on YouTube. If you do that, it gives us more money to put toward Textiles and Tea. So thank you for doing that. Also, just a reminder, we have some deadlines coming up right here. If you want to enter some of these exhibits for Convergence, these deadlines are coming up. Next one's February 9th. Got to jump on it. And y'all enter. It is so much fun. Talk to someone who's entered before. It's just so much fun to have your work at Convergence and have the juror talk about your work. Go for that experience. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience, and we'd love to see your work. Next week, we are so excited. We're going to have Catherine Amadei. If you don't know Catherine, she is the queen of the TC2 computer-driven weaving machine, and we're going to have her on here. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was so much fun. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Happy Valentine's Day and happy tea.
Thank you, Kathy.